We are going to go over the FAFSA, and we're going to go line by line for all of the questions that are going to be asked of a student. We're going to show you a dependent path of what a student who is a dependent student would follow and go through. And then Tommy's going to talk about financial information as well. But just before we begin, know that the session is being recorded and we'll share it online. We are working to get our webinars from January up on our on-demand webinar page. So we're doing that right now, and this will be up there as well. If you're at any point having trouble hearing us, you can have WebEx call you at your phone at the phone number you prefer. And so you'll be able to listen to audio that way. The Q&A feature, if you are on a laptop, is located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So many of my colleagues are joining me today to help answer any questions that you have as we go through this. Additionally, you can view all of our other upcoming webinars on our isac.org/pd/webinars page. We have several coming up for February. And then at the very end, we'll talk about continuing education credits and professional development hours. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you don't know who ISAC is, we are the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and we are the state's financial aid and college access agency. And so we do a variety of things, but one of the biggest things that we're known for is that we help administer the MAP grant, or the Monetary Award Program. And so we administer that program to the colleges and to the students at the college. But one of those other things that we do on the team that I'm on for the professional development is we train professionals on financial aid, financial literacy, PACE framework, as well as how to help support underrepresented students, but as well as understanding loan forgiveness and repayment options as well. So as I mentioned, we're going to cover a dependent student's path of what it will look like as they go through the FAFSA, and then I'm going to pass it over to Tommy to talk about parents and their demographic information that's going to get reported and their financial information. So let's get started. So if you've gotten to do a FAFSA so far with students so far, yay. I know there have been many challenges right now and many glitches for students and families to get started, even to create an FSA ID. And so know that we're aware of those issues. We're making sure that we, follow up with counselors that have any questions. But if you have any questions that you've seen so far during your workshops that you've held, or you've had a student that you're like, you stumped me, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we'll help you out there. So this is what the FAFSA looks like right now, the homepage of it. And so you'll notice that every year the Department of Education will update the design, the graphics. And so one thing they really did this year was they made it really prominent that the 24-25 FAFSA is going to be the one a student wants to complete. So if you have worked with students before that, will complete the wrong year accidentally because they think, oh, we're in the 23-24 academic year, that's the FAFSA I should complete, when in reality we want them to complete the 24-25 FAFSA because we want it to be a year ahead of schedule. So the Department of Education has really made it a point to put it prominently. The FAFSA we want the students to complete is 24-25. So it's front and center now. So they're either going to see start a new form or access existing form. But you'll notice at the bottom there, if they do need to access last year's form, so that's kind of different language. They don't normally call it last year's form. But if for some reason a student does need to access last year's form or the 23-24 one, they will be able to do that as well. So from here, they would press start and then they would log in. So everyone needs an FSA ID, especially the student. That has not changed, but the parents, every single parent needs an FSA ID now, okay? And so from this login, they would type in whether it be their email, their phone, or their username that they have established, and then the password that they created during the creation process. If for some reason a student or a parent does not have an FSA ID yet, they can select create an account and it will take them through that process. For this sake, we're going to move forward as if that we already have an account and we're going to log into that student's account. From here, this is the first thing a student's going to see. The form is going to ask that student, are you a student or are you a parent? And this is what's going to happen is if we're going to follow that student pathway, we're going to select student. But if you were to say, I am a parent, what's going to happen is a drop down is going to come down and it's going to ask that parent to enter the student identifier information as since you're starting the form on their behalf. That's a-okay if a parent chooses to do that. We've seen some workarounds that if a parent starts the form first and then invites their student, as I'll talk about a little bit later, that sometimes will help make sure that things get attached and connected in the system. But most of the times, your students will start the form and then they're going to invite their parents. But for this sake, we're going to say, yes, I am a student. And then because we've already logged in, we'll see on the next couple of slides, it's going to have us review the demographic information. But something new this year that's happened on the FAFSA is both the student and the parent are going to go through an onboarding process, as the department is calling. And so this is a set of videos that they can watch to help them understand of what is the FAFSA. So the first one that they're going to see is just what is the FAFSA and why are they completing the form, right? And so it's a quick little YouTube video that they are more than welcome to watch. From here, they're going to hit continue. And the second piece they're going to see is, well, who is considered a contributor? So contributors are a new name that everyone is being called now from how the FAFSA is set up. And so a student is the main contributor, and then a student's parent or parents, sometimes both parents, both biological or adoptive parents, need to be reported on the form. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in this case, this video is going to explain who is considered a contributor and why they need to be included on the form. And it gives a little overview of how to invite that person. In this case, for a dependent student, how to invite their parent. But in the case if a parent starts the form, they're going to see this same language and they're going to explain how to say invite their student to the form. From there, it's going to say what to expect and say in this video that they'll watch, this is how the form's going to walk through, the questions, the type that you'll be answering. I like to tell families when I work with them that the form is going to hold your hand and guide you through the process. I know sometimes it's a little tricky, so we want you to read everything, but know that it should take you no time at all to get it done, but know that the form is going to guide you as you walk through it. And then the last piece of the onboarding that they're going to see is what happens after they submit their FAFSA. And so you'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen is that right now, the Department of Education is not processing ISERs or institutional student information records, or as what we call them ISERs, or a student would know them as their SAR or their student aid report, or the name's being changed to FAFSA submission summary. Right now, those are not being processed, and so they're not going to get processed until late January, and we're already in late January, so it may be a little bit more time until they're so processed. So if you've worked with a student so far and it still says in review on their status tracker for FAFSA, it's still being processed. But in this case, on the right-hand side of your screen, a parent and a student will see how long it's going to take them once this information is processed. They will get an email saying it has been processed and the information's been sent to the schools that they've listed, and then what their student aid index is, or their SAI. So from there, they're going to press start the FAFSA form. And this is that first thing that they're going to see in case for the student. So the student and parent will see their information depending how they logged in. But for the student, it's going to ask them to review all of this information. And so for this, it's not going to be editable. Before it was, now it's not. And so in the event that a student recognizes that maybe their telephone number is wrong or their permanent mailing address, we'll see in the next screen, is wrong, they actually need to go into their FSA ID and make that correction and update the information and then come back to their FAFSA to continue on. And so they're going to review all this information. If all looks good, they'll go ahead and press continue. And then similar here, they're going to see at the bottom half of the demographic information, they're going to see their permanent mailing address. And so they're going to be able to say, okay, if for some reason something needs to be changed, they can do it. But also as well, this may be grayed out for some students that, again, they have to go through their FSA ID to change the information. And then if they notice that something is, say they no longer live there, they can update the information and come back into the FAFSA. So from there, they'll hit continue. And then the next question they're going to be asked is about their state of legal residence. Now, it's super important to remember here that state of legal residence is not asking about citizenship status for that student or the parent, because both the parent and the student will see this question. It's not asking about citizenship status. It's asking, where do you live and how long have you lived there? And so in this case, for this screenshot, you'll see this student is living in New York and they lived there since 2000. You may get questions from parents or students of like, well, I've lived here my entire life in Illinois, so what do I put? Do I just put my birthday? And that's perfectly fine. So my birthday's in December, but I moved to Illinois in 2015, and so I would put the month and the year that I moved to Illinois. But for students who have lived here their entire lives, they can put their birth month and the year that they were born. From there, what's going to happen is that every single student must provide their consent and approval. So hopefully this isn't too new to everyone joining us today. If you have not heard this, I'm going to explain it what it means. But if you have helped a student and a family complete a FAFSA so far, this should look familiar to you. So everything that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, I know it's kind of small, but this is all legal jargon that the department's put in there to help understand for the student and the parent, that their tax information or their federal tax information or FTI is going to be imported from the IRS. So the new agreement that now is in existence, so you may be familiar of the IRS data retrieval tool, that's gone away. We now have this consent, the royal we here, have the consent and approval process for students and parents to have their taxes transferred directly from the IRS to the Department of Education. And so what's going to happen is that because of a law that was passed that built this data sharing agreement between the IRS and the department, it now says, okay, the student needs to provide their consent and approval to have that information transferred over. And so everyone has to give consent, student and their parents, okay? They have to give consent. If for some reason a student chooses not to give consent, their their SAI or their student aid index is not going to be calculated for them. They're going to be ineligible for federal financial aid, okay? They're not going to be eligible for a Pell Grant. They're not going to be eligible for federal work study or an unsubsidized loan. So it's super important that we have them check this box. You won't see it on your screenshot, but if you've helped students so far, it's towards the bottom of the screen that they'll need to check the box saying, yes, I approve it, and then they'll click the button that says provide consent approval. If for some reason they choose to decline, I apologize. This weather has really messed with my allergies, so I apologize. So if for some reason a student chooses to decline their consent and approval, what's going to happen is that they will be required to manually report their tax information. So what that means then at that point is that they're going to have to manually report their tax information, which means they're going to be verified and have that information to do. And so same thing for the parent, as Tommy will talk about. If they do not provide their consent, the parent's going to have to manually report their tax information. And so the super key thing here is that we want everyone to provide their consent and approval so that they can be eligible for federal financial aid. We don't want them to be ineligible, especially if they're eligible for a Pell Grant or a MAP grant, right? We want to make sure they provide their consent and approval. So from there, once they provide their consent and approval, what's going to happen is that they're going to be asked about their personal circumstances. So you may have noticed this year for the FAFSA that some of the tabs have been changed, the names of them. But no, this is asking about demographic information as well as dependency. They need to know if they need to be able to invite additional contributors to their form or if not. So they'll hit continue. And so it's going to ask the student about their marital status. So what you'll see on the screen now is what a student will see as well. So you're going to see those 5 kind of sections for a student. So it's the personal circumstance, demographics, their financials, the colleges they're going to select, and then their signature. So for this case, we want a student to answer what their marital status is even if maybe they're 18 and they're really been together with their significant other here for a long time, they're not legally married. We don't want them to put that they're married, right? It's really hard to prove that you're not married if you're single, right? Like you have a marriage license if you're married, but if you're single, you don't have that. And so some high school students, they're fine, but we want to make sure that they're answering this question correctly. So we want to make sure if they're not married that they don't put that they're married. So they'll put single, never married. But if they are married, or if you have a student who is 18 and they are married, they certainly can answer it that way too. From there, it's going to ask them about their college or career plans. And so this is a question that you are going to be familiar with. It was found on last year's form as well, and it's found on this year's form. It's going to ask the student, when the student begins the 24-25 school year, what will their college grade level be? And so for some questions we get for this is that, what if a student takes dual credit and they're going to come in with an associate's degree, or they've taken so many credit hours from their community college or their four-year institution, they still can absolutely say that they're freshmen as enrollment, because the classes have taken place at high school. They're still considered freshmen once they enroll in school for a post-secondary institution. What you'll notice here is the change is that third option of other undergraduate, junior, or senior. So it used to lay out freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and the form no longer does that. It just says other graduate and then college, graduate, professional, or beyond. So if you have a student who you still, reaches out to you and they're, say, going for a master's degree or a professional degree. But you'll notice what's going to happen as soon as they hit freshman, the question of when the student begins the 24-25 school year, will they have their first bachelor's degree? It's going to populate no. Now, if a student were to select college, graduate, or professional, it's going to populate yes for them. And so it's going to then say, okay, yes, you already received an undergraduate degree. And so sometimes students are like, well, wait, I'm not graduated yet, or they think that they're going to graduate, and so they think this is where they select that they're a senior in high school, and this is asking about their college plans. So we want them to hit freshman, and then the next question, as I mentioned, will be populated for them. Of it will say no. From here, it's going to ask what we call dependency questions, as well as the department. So these are the questions to help determine if a student needs to provide parental information or not. So if they answer yes to any one of these, so they could answer yes to more than one if that's the case, but they have to answer yes to at least one of these questions to be considered independent for financial aid purposes. So the question's going to ask them, you can select all to apply, but if the student is currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces or purposes other than training, a student is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces at any time since the student turned 13, they were an orphan, so they had no living biological or adoptive parent. At any time since the student turned 13, they were a ward of the court, or they were youth in care, so under the care of DCFS. At any time since the student turned 13, they were in foster care. The student is or was legally emancipated minor, as determined by a court in the state of residence. So if a student doesn't know what emancipated minor is, they don't have that, right? If you're unaware of what an emancipated minor is, this is a student who has gone to court to be, in essence, divorced from their parents, and they have proven that they have the better interest for themselves than their parent does, and so they've divorced their parents, and they are considered an emancipated minor. Again, if your student doesn't know what that is, they don't have it. Most students who, if they are an emancipated minor, they know that they're an emancipated minor. And then the last part is the student is or was in legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step-parent as determined by a court in their state of residence. And so this has to be through a court of law. And so we have gotten questions about, well, say that you have a family that has moved to Illinois, and they have been, at your high school for the last 3 years. The student's going to graduate this year, but they came from Indiana. And they have the court documents that say, aunt is their legal guardian. That still holds up. Even though now Illinois is their permanent and fixed home, what's going to happen is that when they got the determination from the court, Indiana was their place of residence. And so that will still hold up there, even if now that they've come to Illinois. Now, the flip side of this is, though, you may work with students like I did, that a student lives with their aunt or their uncle or their grandparent, but they're their guardian for school-related purposes. Um, but they've never gone through a court to have legal guardianship established. That student cannot answer yes to this question because they've never gone through the court. You may also have the case in which you have families who have immigrated from another country, and so we see this sometimes a lot with Mexico, is that for families that come here, or students that will, and they come to stay with a family member that's here in the States, and they have a document through the court that says this person is their legal guardian, but that document's actually notarized. So in Mexico, that holds up. A notarized document is considered valid. But here in the States, that's not. A notarized document does not hold up, and so it has to be through a court here in the States that says that that student's under legal guardianship. If a student can't answer yes to one of these, that's okay. They're going to select none of the apply, but they'll be able to answer additional questions if they have an unusual circumstance. So the next question they're going to see at any time, is at any time or after July 1, was the student unaccompanied, or they're experiencing homelessness or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? So, if they answer no, they're not going to see the bottom half of this screen. But if they answer yes, so we're going to follow the pathway that the student answered yes, of what will show up, and it's going to show the bottom half of that screen of, do you have, did any of the following determine the student was homeless or at risk of being homeless? They're going to select one of those boxes if they do, and so I'm going to draw your attention actually to a new designation a student has, or can receive a designation from, is a director or designee of a project supported by federal TRIO or a Gear Up program. So for those of you who are counselors, or if you are a part of a TRIO program and you work for a TRIO program, what's going to happen is that if you can be designated on behalf of the director for that TRIO program to write a determination letter for that student, because you know that they're experiencing homelessness and they're unaccompanied. And so you can now say, yes, I can give that determination to that student, and that student can check yes here. So that's one big change that has happened for that. And so I wanted to make sure to draw your attention. But in this case, say for some reason a student does not have a determination yet. That's okay. They're still going to select at that point none of the apply because they don't have the determination, but they are experiencing homelessness and they're unaccompanied. And so it's important to remember here of what the definition says for experiencing homelessness and unaccompanied. Homelessness has a stigma around it, and some people think it's living under a bridge, or it's living in your car, or it's an older person who's maybe a veteran, right? That's an idea of homelessness, of someone who's experiencing homelessness. But for students, it's not maybe that black and white. For some students, experiencing homelessness is that they live with an aunt and an uncle, but the aunt and uncle have no legal guardianship over that student except for, say, for school-related purposes, but they have no obligation to take care of that student. And the question then is, that point, once they leave that home, or if the aunt and uncle choose to have that student removed, where does the student go? So then the student is then experiencing homelessness, but on top of that, they're also unaccompanied. Unaccompanied means for financial aid purposes is that they're not in the physical custody of their parents. So in this case that you have a student that lives with aunt and uncle, and maybe you know that they live with aunt and uncle, but they are their person for school-related purposes, but it's not through a court, that student can be experiencing homelessness, or they're at risk because that aunt and uncle have no obligation to take care of that student, and they're unaccompanied because they're not in the physical custody of their parents. Unaccompanied has to be in the physical custody of their parent. I'm going to pass this off to Tommy now, just because my voice is starting to go on me. I'm going to pass this to Tommy to talk about unusual circumstances and what's going to happen next for a student.
Thanks, Megan. We'll go ahead and take over here again. My name is Tommy Semanek, one of the professional development specialists in the agency here. Give Megan a chance to breathe a little bit. I know having an allergy attack can always be kind of a pain in the neck. So we're going to go ahead and continue on here with unusual circumstances here. This is a new sort of way they've categorized acceptable reasons for why a person would not put parental information on the FAFSA here. And you can see on your screen, they do have a list of some of these unusual circumstances that would be acceptable for them. Otherwise, having to contact their parents, or maybe they pose a risk to the student, for example. So maybe they're leaving home to an abusive environment. They've been granted refugee or asylee status. They're victims of human trafficking. Maybe both parents are incarcerated, or maybe they just don't know where their parents are. They have no way of getting in contact with them. These would be considered acceptable reasons for not providing parental information, and that's what the form is stating here. Otherwise, if they didn't have any one of these unusual circumstances, the student would, of course, then put no. If they answered yes to that question, then they would be able to complete the application as what's called provisionally independent. This is also new with the 24-25 FAFSA. What this does is basically give the student the opportunity to complete the entire application and receive an estimated Pell Grant as well as a student aid index estimate. In the past, that wasn't the case. They would have to just skip the parental information and, of course, still follow up with the financial aid office to be granted, hopefully, a dependency override, but they would not see estimated values of a student aid index or a Pell Grant. Now with this, they would. This kind of flags institutions a little bit to say, oh, we have a provisionally independent student. We have to make sure that the verification process is initiated. Students are still responsible for reaching out and requesting that dependency override on their end, but this just kind of helps them complete the application a little bit more completely so they can get some estimated numbers. So at the end of it here, it will, of course, tell the student whether, based on the questions they have answered, be determined as independent or dependent for purposes of financial aid. Now, once it says that, it's going to tell them, okay, you are required to provide parental information. But then we have sort of this question at the bottom of your screen here that has sort of been kind of confusing to students and families. It's asking students if they want to apply for a direct unsubsidized loan only. The only individuals who need to be answering yes to this questions are if you deal with students who have parents, for example, that are just unwilling to provide their information on the application. For whatever reason, they don't trust the government. They think tax claiming status matters and they don't have to put their information on the form. Whatever the situation is, right? If there is an unacceptable reason for parents not providing their information on the form, the application is trying to give students at least the opportunity to apply for unsubsidized loans. But we want the large majority of our students, of course, answering no to this question because we want them eligible for the other types of aid that comes with filling out a FAFSA. That's also subsidized loans, Pell Grant, and in our cases here in the state of Illinois, a MAP grant. So make sure, again, the large majority of your students need to be answering no to this question. Gotten quite a bit of confusion from students already who, of course, are just going to kind of put yes for everything and kind of not really read in between the lines. So thankfully, who is a parent for purposes of financial aid has not changed. We still have our adoptive, biological, and step parents. For our step parents, assuming they are married to a biological or adoptive parent. Here at the state, we kind of like to use the acronym SIMBA. You think of the Lion King and the little cub getting held in the air, right? Nice, easy way to remember it. SIMBA stands for step, if married, biological, adoptive. Those are considered parents for purposes of financial aid, and nobody else is contributing their information on the form. We still have our common situations here now where if both parents are unmarried, but they still live together, both need to provide their information on the application. And in this situation, both of these parents are going to have FSA IDs because they're both going to need to give consent for the IRS to transfer any federal tax information onto the application. The same will be the case for our married filing separately, folks, right? Both are going to have to log in with FSA IDs and provide consent. We can talk about that a little bit later when we get to the consent piece as well. At the bottom of your screen, you're seeing the biggest change when it comes to parental information. For parents who are divorced or separated, student will now report the parent who provides the most financial support to the student within the last 12 months. In the past, it was who did the student live with the most in the last 12 months. That's no longer the case. It has been changed. It's whoever provides the most financial support to the student within the last 12 months. So this is probably going to affect our returning college students the most. It's possible that in years prior, right, they had, say, mom on the form for the longest time, and then now this year with the change, they may have to switch who was a parent on their application. So something to be aware of. The tiebreaker, of course, is at the bottom of your screen. It says, you might have parents coming to you with divorce decrees and court documents saying, hey, the courts say it's equal. It's 50-50 support to our child. That's what it is. Okay, then it's whoever has the greater income and assets. That would be the parent who puts their information on the form. Now, another nice thing about the application as well is that we have this sort of new parent wizard tool, they're calling it. Basically, there are a series of enhanced skip logic questions on the application that better help the student determine which parent am I putting on this form. So it starts here with asking students, are they married to each other? Right? We know if the answer to that question is yes, both parents are going on the application, right? That's easy enough. But if they were to answer no to this question, it follows with other questions to help them determine which parent to put on the application. And here's what you're seeing here on your screen on the right-hand side, right? Okay, let's say the parents are not married to each other. All right, well, do they live together? If the student answers yes to that question, it would say, great, we still need both parents. If the answer is no, then we have the divorce separation kind of rule there, where did one parent provide more financial support to you, the student, over the last 12 months? And they would, of course, answer yes or no to that question. And if the answer to that question was no, right? Okay. And then maybe did that other parent, did they remarry, right? Trying to determine if there was another step parent involved. So you can kind of see they kind of go step by step for the student to try and determine exactly which parent or parents are you putting on the application here. Then we get into the invitation piece of the application, right? We know students are going to have to invite contributors to their application. This is the new sort of role-based form that the Department of Ed has kind of designed here. So in this sort of circumstance section here, this is where students invite parents, right? Because they have two parents here as an example to show that both parents could get invited. So they'll input some basic demographic information to invite parents. We have name, date of birth, social security number, if that is applicable. If not, there is a box that hopefully would work, and we'll be able to check that, indicating that the parent does not have a social security numbers. We have seen a lot of bugs on the application regarding this. Sometimes this box doesn't work. It doesn't allow students to continue on. The Department of Ed is aware of these issues, and they're currently working on resolving them. And then, of course, email addresses, making sure that the email address is correct and matches what would be on the parent's FSA ID. Whether hopefully parents have created FSA IDs already, and if they have not, needing to use the email address that they're going to use for their FSA ID. If they don't match, the parents will not receive the invitation email, and then the applications won't link. But hopefully everything is correct. They're going to hit invite parent, and then they'll move on. And then we transfer into student demographic questions here. They're going to ask about the student as well as the parents and help them determine how much aid can receive for school. It's just sort of an intro screen there. And then we have the demographic sections here. We'll ask about the student's gender. Again, the following questions here do not impact federal aid eligibility in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, etc. They're just being used for research purposes only. And there are options for these questions that give students the chance to say, prefer not to answer, but they can't just skip over the questions without clicking one of the bubbles. But if they don't want to share that information, totally fine. They can put prefer not to answer. So here's the gender question. You see the following choices there on your screen. And then we have race and ethnicity, right? This is new for the year that they are required. You can see here the first question is the student of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? They have a variety of options. And then they have the race question here. And then when you click on one of these boxes here, another screen will pop up that will allow them to kind of say further what they would be. So for white, for example, they give options of German, Polish, Irish, English, etc. And it is the same for each one of those categories. And then we have the student citizenship status question here, which asks students if they are U.S. citizens, eligible non-citizens, or a non-eligible non-citizen. And the best way to figure out who is an eligible non-citizen is really just to go to the notes section of the FAFSA here. We have screenshotted on the PDF version of the application, though that notes section that explains exactly who is an eligible non-citizen. So we have our permanent U.S. residents, as well as our conditional green card holders. Also the holder of the I-94 form from the Department of Homeland Security. That would show a couple of designations, whether that be refugee, asylum grantee, parolee, etc. Maybe we have our T visa holders or Cuban Haitian entries as well. And then if they have a letter from the Department of Health and Human Services showing that they are victims of human trafficking. So it's in that red box highlighted. Those are eligible non-citizens. If it isn't one of those, they are non-eligible non-citizens. There's a million different letter visas out there. If it doesn't match what you see in the eligible non-citizen section, they're not eligible. Some common examples of that would be outside of the red box on the right-hand side of your screen. Our DACA students, for example, are non-eligible non-citizens. Now, in other states, some states have different requirements. They would have their DACA students, for example, fill out a FAFSA because they do have social security numbers. They technically can complete the application. But here in the state of Illinois, we would not do that. We would turn them to the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. And perhaps if they meet all the eligibility criteria there, they can receive a MAP grant. Other examples of non-eligible non-citizens would be our F and J visas, right? All those different letters I was talking about. There's a million of them. Like if you have international students, foreign exchange student visas, etc. More examples of non-eligible non-citizens. Then we have the parent education status. Trying to indicate if we have first-generation college students here. It asks students, did either of the students' parents attend college or complete college? So they have a variety of options. They can select neither parent attended college, or one or both attended but did not complete their degrees. And then one or both parents completed college, and then I don't know. Again, trying to flag our first-generation college students. Perhaps then when institutions receive that information, they can let students know of any first-generation programs or resources that they have at their campuses. Another new question here on the application this year is the student parent killed in the line of duty, right? Trying to indicate folks perhaps eligible for a federal Iraq Afghanistan service grant. So the question asks if the student's parent or legal guardian was killed in the line of duty while serving on active duty as a member of the armed forces after September 11th, 2001, or performing official duties as a public safety officer. And you can see right at the bottom, it does give a little bit of some examples of who was a public safety officer. So we're thinking law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency service workers, etc. So it applies to an umbrella of folks. High school completion status. This is indicating, right, what their completion status will be when they begin the 24-25 year. They have the options of high school diploma, a GED certificate, or any sort of other state recognized equivalent high school certificate degree, right? Homeschooled or none of the above. And then here's where students would input their high school information. They can search it by the state, city, and name. And they'll be able to go ahead and indicate and confirm their high schools. Nothing there has changed for the 24-25 year. And now we're going to go ahead and transition into dependent student financials. I'm going to turn things back over to Megan.
Thanks, Tommy. Okay, we're gonna now move on forward to the student financial information. Make me the presenter real quick. Okay. So what's gonna happen now for a student, what they're gonna see as they go through the form is that they're gonna see kind of this introduction of like, hey, now we need your financial information to help determine what's happening. And so to help determine your eligibility for aid. So the first, because they've provided their consent and approval, what's going to happen now is that they're only going to be asked certain questions moving forward. And this is similar for parents, as Tommy will talk about. What's going to happen is that they'll see these questions that you see on your screen. Maybe they won't see all of these questions. Some of the questions are optional, but it also is based on how the information is imported. So in this case, for this student, it's asking them if they had an IRA rollover, or another IRA for a qualified plan. They would enter an amount there. Did the student receive earned income credit or EIC? And then the next question about the amount of college grant scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS. Most high school students are going to put 0 for this because they don't have what is called T98 forms. And so from the college, to show how much grant money they received from the university, I got one when I was in college every year. This is where your college students that you may still work with would put that information, but high school students won't answer. They can put 0 here. Similar, if the foreign income, earned income exclusion, if this really more matters to parents, if you have a parent that does make this, but in case you do have a student who does have foreign income, the IRS can only import or transfer taxes for the United States. And so if that student does have foreign income earned, they need to report it here. And they still need to convert it over from the currency using the Federal Reserve for the daily exchange rate. And so, but it is not uncommon for maybe these answers to be 0, or in this case, they didn't have an earned income credit or that EIC. it's a-okay for these answers to be 0 for the student. Now this is where, depending on what's going to happen, if you have a student who starts their form, they're going to be required to answer their asset information or investment information, because they haven't been if it's been determined they need parental information because of how everything works with the adjusted gross income. If a parent starts the form first, a student may not have to answer these questions because the parent will have answered them, and it's been determined that they're not required to report investments. So one of the changes with the FAFSA this year is that for certain families, if they meet certain criteria, they're not required to be asked about investment information anymore. And so they're not going to see these questions of what's the current net value, the net worth of your investment, including your real estate, as well as the current net worth of businesses or family farms or investment farms. They're not going to see those questions. But in this case, for the student, they are going to see them because they started the form first. And so the first question they're going to see is annual child support received, if they did receive any. This is for their own student. So like if the student has a child, it's asking about for that child that they have, if they've received child support, not about the student themselves, if their parent has paid child support to them. That would be in the parent section. This is asking that child support received as if that student who's completing the form has a child themselves and received support. So it's okay that answer is 0. From there, they're going to be asked about the current total of their cash savings and checking accounts. This is the same as it always is. So it can be an estimate number. You know, you may have families that will pull up their Chase accounts right then and there. They want to put the exact number for their checking and savings accounts, which please feel free. But it certainly can be an estimate. But for students, if they put, $50, that's okay too. It's also okay to put 0 for them. Now, this is where the investments come into play. If you may have some savvy 18-year-olds who have some investments, who have some stocks and play the market in a sense. But we're going to talk about how to calculate some of this. And so it will be the same for the parents in this case, but in case you do work with a student who is independent and needs to report this information, this is how it will work. Even for a dependent student, if they do have stocks or bonds, they need to report this information under their information. So first, how do we calculate net worth? Net worth means that it's the current value as of today. As of today, the form is being completed. Okay, that has not changed. And so as of today is as the day the form is being submitted. So in this case, we often will get questions, especially for the cash savings or checking accounts of, well, what if like I have rent coming out? What if I had like, can I exclude that? And it's as of today. If you want to wait to submit the form until after your rent comes out, then that's on you. But it's similar to the net worth. It's as of today. What is the current value of that net worth today that the form is being submitted? So we take the current value minus the debt owed, and then that is the net worth of that investment or business. And so if for some reason it comes out to be a negative number for the net worth, then it's reported as 0, and you don't families don't report that on the FAFSA as a negative number. Now, what do investments include? Now, this is what you see in the screenshot. This comes from the paper form for the FAFSA. Most of your students do complete an online form, but you can access the paper form to see the full list of investments. You'll notice here that on the left side of your screen on the online version, there's these little like little icons that have eyes in them. And so you can click that as like your help text. So they used to be question marks, now they're little icons. And you can click that as your help text. So if a family is, confused of what to report as investments, I know sometimes we get questions from teachers because they're a parent, and so they want to know if they need to report their 403B for their retirement, and that answer is no, because it's a retirement account. So, but what does an investment include? It includes real estate, not the home in which you live, but if you own any second properties or rental property, that's considered real estate. As well as for the rental property, it has to be a unit within a family home that has its own entrance, kitchen, and bath. And it has to be rented to someone other than a family member. So let's use this scenario. So say you have a family lives in a 3-family flat, okay? They live on the bottom floor. Aunt and uncle live on the 2nd floor, but then a family friend not related to that family lives on the 3rd floor, okay? They own the family at the bottom, and the student that's applying for aid, that family owns the entire building, okay? That's the home in which they live, but each of the units in that home in the building has its own entrance, kitchen, and bath. So what needs to be figured out is if any part of those units need to be reported as an investment. So what do we know about families? So for families, the home in which they live is not reported. So that bottom unit is not reported on a FAFSA. Family is considered anyone who is or were related to that person. So in case you have, say that aunt and uncle, or they say that they're still together, they live on the second floor and they're related to the student by blood or by marriage, right? They're also considered family. So they're, in that case, we're not gonna, that family is not gonna report the second unit. But that very top unit, that third unit, is rented out to a family friend. And so that family at the bottom needs to figure out, yes, that unit needs to be reported on the FAFSA. So what we do is still the same thing. We take the current value minus the debt owed. So say, for example, you have a, what's going to happen, say you have a $600,000 unit, $600,000 building. Okay, that's the current value. But the debt that the family owes on it is $300,000. Okay, so in the calculation, we take 600,000 minus 300,000. That gives us the net worth is $300,000. But we need to figure out how much each unit is worth. So then we take the $300,000 divided by 3. So each unit worth is then worth $100,000. So using that logic about who is family, so we don't report the home in which a family lives. So there's $100,000 they're not reporting. That second unit is still the aunt and uncle, that's their family. That unit is not reported, so that $100,000 is not getting reported. But that third unit is getting reported because it's just rented out to a family friend. At that point, that $100,000 would be reported on that student's FAFSA. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a little bit of math, but that's how that net worth, if especially when you have rental properties like that and the family lives in the building too, how it's calculated out. Now, if you have a family that all 3 units are rented by a family, none of it gets reported because it's the home in which is lived. Okay. But what's going to happen from there is that trust funds are also reported as investments. UGMA or UTMA accounts, if you don't know what those are, you don't have them. They are very, very, very specific accounts. So a UGMA is a Uniform Gift of Minors Act, and then a UTMA is a Uniform Transfers of Minors Act. These is a very, very specific types of investments for a student in which they are the owner of the account, the student is, but the parent is the custodian. So think this, the parent is the executor of the account. In that case, those are reported, right, as a parent investment because the parent is the custodian, but the student is the owner. I know it feels odd, but we'll see a little bit later that it's not reported as if you're an owner of the account. But if you don't know, if a family doesn't know what they are, they don't have them, okay? They're very, very specific investments. Money market funds, mutual funds, certificates of deposits or CDs are also reported. Stock options, bonds, and other securities are also reported on a FAFSA. Installment and land sale contracts, including mortgages held and commodities. Okay, so those are everything that's included so far. From there, additionally, there are also other investments that are included on a form. The first is the qualified educational benefits or education savings account. So these are Coverdell's, the 529 plans that we have here across the states, or the refund value of that prepaid tuition plan. So you may know right now that if you did a FAFSA last year, is that for families who had multiple 529 plans, the value of all of the 529 plans had to be reported on the student's FAFSA. That is no longer the case anymore. So say you have a family of 5, you have mom and dad, and they have 3 children, okay? And their oldest is a senior in high school, and they're applying for aid. And then they have a 529 plan for all 3 of their children. What's going to happen now is only the value of that 18-year-old student, their oldest, is going to be reported on a FAFSA now. That 529 plan is always, always, always reported as a parent investment if parental information is reported. If a student is independent and they are the owner of the account, even though they're the beneficiary of it, the student is the owner of the account, then they would put it as a student investment. But in the case of a dependent student, what's going to happen is a 529 plan is always reported as a parent investment. But the change is that only the value of the oldest student's account is reported. The parents no longer have to report the other two children's accounts. So in this case as well, so what is not reported as investment? So it's a pretty long list of what is included. It's okay if you don't remember them off the top of your head. You can certainly refer back to the paper form for their notes, or as well as the family can click on the help text in the form to say, okay, do we have this? No. Okay, great. No, we don't have that. Okay, cool. Our answer is 0. But what's not reported as an investment? So the home in which you live, the value of insurance, of life insurance, ABLE accounts, which these are very specific accounts for in case someone um, ends up being disabled and it's been money set aside for that person to help with their healthcare expenses because they're disabled. So that is not reported on a FAFSA. Retirement plans are not reported on a FAFSA. So these are 401ks, pensions, annuities, non-education IRAs, Keogh plans, as well as 403b. So retirement accounts whatsoever are not reported on a FAFSA. Okay, that's super important to remember. They also do not include UGMA or UTMA accounts that for which you are the custodian but not the owner. So it's important to remember that 529 plans are always reported as a parent investment. UGMA and UTMA accounts, if a family has one, okay, they're always, always, always reported as a student investment. Okay, that's the difference between the two. So just keep that in mind. Again, UGMA and UTMA accounts are very specific. If you don't know what they are, the family doesn't have them. So the other thing with businesses and investment farms is that if a family is required to report investments this year, again, if and only if, not every family will see all of these questions, but if they are required to, if a mom and dad or say a two-parent household, whatever the configuration is that they are required now, if they're required to report investment information, to report their small business or investment farm. So it's a big change from last year. And so there is some conversation happening, especially for the farming community. So Iowa did a lot of testing before the FAFSA was released about, our families, majority of our families are, farming communities. And so if they're going to be required to report their investment farms now, it means that their eligibility for aid may no longer be the case. They may no longer be eligible for a Pell Grant because their SAI, or what it is made now still as an EFC, it has skyrocketed. But still for the businesses or investment farms, you still take the current value, you take the net worth of it. So you still would take the current value minus the debt owed, and that's the net worth. If it's a negative number, you don't report it, or that family doesn't. But in case that you have questions from families of like, well, what's considered debt? Especially for a farm or for a business, it's the land itself, it's the building, it's the machinery, anything that was used as collateral for the business or farm can be used as considered as debt. And so then you would take the calculation and go do the current value minus the debt owed to equal the net worth. So from here, a student's going to select their colleges. And so they'll see this screen of, great, we're going to move on. And so the next question that they're going to see is, where should we send the FAFSA information? So it's going to ask the student to search and select what colleges they would like to list. So one big change so far this year, if you've noticed it, is that students are able to list up to 20 now. It used to only be 10 on the online version of the FAFSA. Now it's 20. So hopefully this kind of eliminates that process of a student would select 10, they'd submit their FAFSA, have to let it process, and then go back into their FAFSA and add more schools. So by allowing up to 20 to be listed, hopefully a student no longer has to do that. Of course, a student could always go back into their FAFSA and add schools as needed. But say you have a student and the first time that they're doing their FAFSA does list up all 20 schools and they have more that they would like to add, they still follow the same process. So they would add the first 20 that they'd want, submit their FAFSA, let it process, and then they can go back in to add the other schools that they needed. So in this case, what's going to happen is that you can search by the state, the city, and the school name. And so for this case, especially when you start typing in the city and the school name, for this case, what will happen is a pre-populated box will show up because it's going to try and figure out what you're looking for. So if you were to select Illinois as the state, but then put in the school name as just Northern, it may come up Northern Illinois University, but it may pull up North Park University because North is in Northern. And so that may happen as well, but it will have a pre-populated box. So for this case, this student wants to go to Aurora. I went to Aurora. This is my screenshot I used. So I would select Aurora. And so what will happen is they would click on the school on the left-hand side where it says Aurora University. And then where you see on the screen it says selected, it's going to give them like a checkbox to say you want to select that school. So they'll press select. They, of course, can add more. And when they do the little search tool down here where it says search more schools, the next screen the student's going to see like, cool, I've added all the schools I wanted. It's going to list them out of these are the schools that are going to receive your information. And so the screen that will pop up for here in Illinois is that to be eligible for state grant aid in Illinois, you must list an eligible in-state college. So the order of your school and your college list will not impact your eligibility for state aid programs. That is true. You could list 20 schools and only one of them is Illinois, and it doesn't matter what order it is. We'll still get that school will still get the information and it still will populate on Gap Access. But for other states have this requirement where they have to put them in a certain order in order to be eligible for state aid. So, but Illinois, we don't do that. So in this case, for this screen, as you see, this student listed Aurora, and then they've also listed U of I down at Urbana and Champaign. And so they can see the view, click on view info if they want, and it gives them graduation rates and some other information about those schools. Of course, if they're like, you know what, I added that school, but now I don't want to, they certainly can remove it if they choose to. From here, it's going to show the student review page. And so what's going to happen is that they will see all of this information. It's super important to remember that the student, if they try to click on the signature where you see her at the bottom, that if they click on the arrow for the drop down, they can't click into that box. Okay, they have to press continue. Especially if as a dependent student, what's going to happen is that it's going to show the parental information at the bottom because it's been determined that a parent needs to be reported on a FAFSA. So what's going to happen is that they'll need to report it, and then they have to scroll farther down to sign and submit their form. Okay, so that's one thing I've seen with students when I've gone to a couple FAFSA workshops is that a student thinks that they submitted their section, but when they log in on their FAFSA tracker under the My Aid activity, their My Activity portion of their FSAID account, it says provide signature. And so the student's going to come to this, be directed to this page, and they need to scroll to the bottom and hit continue. So from here, for dependent students, what's going to happen is going to show them who is the contributor information and who's been the invitation it's been sent to. So it's going to list the parent contributors, the date that it was sent, and then the status. So the invite's been sent, or say the invite's been accepted. A student absolutely has the ability to edit this. There have been cases in which we've seen right now at the workshops is that a student will invite the parent, but the parent doesn't get the notification, or two, they do get the email, but then it doesn't connect like with the students. And so it's super important to remember as we're advising students that they're making sure they're putting the information for that parent as a contributor that match the FSAID. We cannot stress that enough. Like some parents have not gotten the emails because the student entered the email wrong. Or I do it now is like I'll type my email out and I'll put a space after it. The Department of Education, as well as in that contributor information, views a space as a valid character. And because people have spaces in their last names, they think the space is a valid character as part of the email address or that person's name. So super important to remember if some reason a contributor has not gotten an email or the system saying we found an FSAID but it's not matching. Double check that there's no spaces after that person's name that shouldn't be there. In addition, to make sure that the birthday is correct as well as that parent's email address. The other thing is here for I worked with a family at a workshop that, mom and dad filed their taxes together, and dad had an FSA ID, but he wasn't getting those codes, right, to confirm his stuff. And so I had asked mom, do you have an FSA ID? And she said yes. And so I said, okay, well, let's change the contributor information. Since they filed jointly, only one parent needs to be reported on the FAFSA at that point because they file their taxes jointly. So what would happen at that point is that we removed dad as a contributor, but we edited the information and then added mom, and it when the email came on right through, and they were able to submit their FAFSA. So try that sometimes especially if you have mixed status families and one parent has a social but the other does not. Use the parent that has a social so that they can create their FSA ID, because we've definitely heard some challenges for parents who don't have socials. They can't create their FSA IDs right now. But if you do have this case of a mixed status family that one parent does have a social and one does not, use the parent that has the social to create the FSA ID, but then also to have further contributor information. So this is what the submit portion of the student is going to look like. And so they're going to see the green box saying, okay, this is all kind of just legal jargon, right? Saying you're of sound of mind as the student, that you understand what you're doing. And they're going to have to check that box that you see on the right side of your screen that says, I, Raya Tran, agree to the terms outlined above. And then they're going to press submit. They're not going to see sign and submit because the parent information has not been added yet. Only the student is only going to see to be able to submit their section of the form, okay? They're not going to be, unless it's an independent student, but in this case, a dependent student is only going to see a submit button. They're not going to see sign and submit. So once I hit submit, this is what's going to show up for that student. It's going to say, yay, you've done this, right? But there's some other things that need to happen from moving forward. And so on the left side of your screen, it's going to say what's required of them as dependent students. There's their contributor information again that they've reported to be invited. And then also on the bottom half of that screen, they say, what can you do next, right? We want to check their email, make sure they got a confirmation page. And then it also tells that student your FAFSA form still needs contributor information. And so making sure if the email should come pretty quickly. So I know sometimes schools, like the service gets blocked. But if you're doing it at home, the email should come pretty quickly, or just give it a few minutes to come through. Of course, for the parents, check the spam and junk mail. Sometimes it may go there because their systems the email addresses don't recognize FSA ID's email that's come through. But still have them check those other areas just in case. It's important. The one new thing this year that the department's kind of really honing in on is that a parent contributor only has 45 days to add their information, or they're going to be considered inactive on the form, and it's going to make them start all over. So while the student has done their information, if the parent doesn't accept that information within 45 days, the system's going to think they're considered inactive, and it's going to remove them. Then the student has to go back in and add the contributor again. So that's always been the case about the 45 days inactivity. It's just not been something the department's really honed in on, but this year they are, because they want to make sure students and their families get the form completed as soon as possible. All right. That should say parent and identity, but I'm gonna pass this over to Tommy now, to talk about parent emails and what happens from here.
Thank you, Megan. All right, we'll go ahead and continue on here with the parent section here. So Megan was talking about that student invitation piece, right? And when student goes ahead and invites parent, they should, of course, receive an email with the invitation. Say, hey, so-and-so, this student has identified you as a contributor. It's time to input your information onto the application. And this is an example of what that email will look like, right? We have the left-hand portion of your screen kind of explaining what I just sort of explained to you all and why providing that information is important, and then why they were invited here, reasons to finish it, etc. So they can go ahead and hit login straight from this email, and it should prompt them to log in with their FSA ID or create one if they have not already. Now, Megan's mentioned a couple of bugs sort of throughout the presentation. As we are aware, there's a variety of issues so far with the application. And one of them I'll mention here is that sometimes this email link to log in doesn't work. And sometimes when you even click on it, it won't link to the student's application who invited the parent, for example. So the workaround that I have tried and some of my other colleagues have is just to get out of the email, just log in with the parent's FSA ID straight away, and it should pop up in the My Activities Center showing that they have an invitation and they can accept that invitation straight into their account and complete their portion of the FAFSA. Now here's what the login screen would look like. Very similar, the exact same way that would look like for a student. Parents will go ahead and log in with their account information. Again, if they do not have an FSA ID already, they can hit create an account sort of at that middle bottom portion of your screen. So here was that My Activities Center kind of page that I was showing or talking about earlier here, right? Right away in the beginning, they'll have that active screen bar there that says you have been requested and invited to be a contributor for your student's FAFSA here. And they can go ahead and click on Get Started to accept the invitation, and it'll take them right to their section of the FAFSA. So here is the contributing piece of information here, just some frequently asked questions here, just some summary information for parents to read about why they need to do this, why they've been invited, etc. And they'll go ahead and they'll hit continue. Here is the identity information. Again, like Megan talked about with students, this is pre-populated directly from their FSA ID. So a lot of times, especially with parents, I'm here with them and I'm looking through this and I say, we got to double check that this is all correct on your end. If it's not, we have to stop. We'll have to go to the account settings tag on the right-hand corner bottom of the screen and go into your FSA ID and edit the information there. Then that would populate onto this screen and everything should be good. But we got to make sure that that's correct because they will not have the ability to edit it here on this screen. Here's the mailing address, right? Pretty straightforward here. City, state, zip code, and country, all of that is good to go. They have the ability to edit that there, and then can hit continue when that all looks correct. And then boom, right away, parents see that consent and approval piece, right? Just like the students did. Parents, all contributors for that matter, right, must give consent. Otherwise, students are ineligible for federal aid, period. What's going to happen if no consent's provided, they will not, of course, calculate an SAI, which then, of course, it makes them ineligible for federal aid. And it'll still let them continue on with the application. It's going to prompt them to report this tax information manually. But every time they try and do so, a warning screen is going to pop up to them saying, hey, by the way, you haven't given consent yet. You haven't given approval. There's no point in doing what you're doing to continue on. Again, it'll let them keep going, but every time they try and keep going, a warning screen is going to pop up telling them stop, go back, provide consent, and then, of course, they will not have to provide their tax information manually. It'll all get transferred over on the back end via the IRS. They won't even see those numbers be populated on the application itself. It's a pretty nice and easy process when it works and everyone gives consent. And then, of course, you can allow students to become eligible for some aid. We'll go ahead and transfer now into demographic sections about parents. First question is about marital status here, indicating if parents are single, never married, if they were unmarried but living together, married but filed, married but not separated, and then they have remarried, separated, divorced, and widowed. So a wide variety of options there for parents to choose. State of legal residence. Again, remember the purpose of this question as well. This is not determining citizenship status here. For example, it nowhere on the form asks about parent citizenship status. This is when they made, say, Illinois, for example, their fixed, true, and permanent home. For a lot of folks that we work with, sometimes this is the year they were born, right? And that's totally fine. It's just when they made Illinois their fixed, true, and permanent residence. Because this is a federal form, different states have different requirements for their own state aid, for example, hence why this question's on the form. For here in the state of Illinois, it is not as prevalent. And now we're into parent financials. So this is going to go ahead and has a little introductory screen for parents to read about their financial information. It'll ask maybe about investments, if they're required to report investments, etc. So we'll ask them about federal means tested benefits, if any they have received within the last 2 years. So it says at any time between the years 2022 or 23, did the student or anyone in the family side receive benefits from any of the following federal programs? And this list has expanded from what we're used to seeing in previous years. For example, the earned income tax credit is on there. Free and reduced lunch has been added. Keep in mind that it has to be via the federal government in eligibility criteria for free and reduced lunch. For example, a lot of our I think all of our CPS students actually receive free or reduced lunch just because CPS gives it out. But not all of those are necessarily eligible according to the federal government. So we have to make sure that they are meeting those guidelines before they answer that question. Others on here would be like the refundable credit for coverage under a qualified health plan, TAN, SNAP, SSI benefits, and WIC are all federal mean tested benefits listed here. It's a select all that apply question, so they have the ability to do so. And then the tax filing status. Did or will the parent file a 2022 joint tax return with their current spouse? Answering yes to this question really just requires one parent to be logged in, completing the rest of the parent section here. Also means that only one parent needs to provide consent and approval for the IRS to transfer their tax information over onto the application. If the parents answer no to this question, then it of course indicate, well, how did you file? Was it married filing separately? Did you file a single, etc.? It kind of goes through those details. Remember, if we have married filing separately individuals or unmarried but living together, we have to make sure that both parents create FSA IDs and both go ahead and log in and give consent. This next question you're seeing here is about family size. This is a question that will be pre-populated on the application here as you're seeing, but they will have the ability to edit this information because, of course, family size can change within the last 2 years. So it may say, all right, as of today, is anything different than what is on your 2022 taxes? So if it's different, they can click yes and change it. If they just click no, then it's the exact same as it was on their 2022 taxes. So the example we're seeing here is a family size of 3 with 1 parent and then parent 2 and 1 child. Question on the bottom will ask about the number of children or other dependents who live with the parents and receive more than half of their support between July 24 and the end of June of 2025, indicating other dependents, not including, of course, the student who is applying. Then it's going to ask about the parent number in college. Something to note about this question is that it is no longer relevant in terms of the calculation for the student aid index. In years past, this was a number that used to be divided in the expected family contribution calculation. That is no longer the case. With the student aid index, this number no longer gets divided, but it is still being asked on the application. So it can't be fair game for professional judgment if, say, you do have instances where families have 3 or 4 kids, for example, in college at the same time. Perhaps it is game for some professional judgment. But it does ask how many people in the parent's family will be in college between July of 24 and the end of June 2025. We do not include the parent in this question. And then here's the questions that we typically would see parents ask of their taxes. This is the stuff that did not get transferred over from the direct data exchange, right? A lot of it did, right? Adjusted gross income, income tax paid, etc. Right? That's all happened on the back end. This is all that would remain. So we have about a question about the earned income tax credit. Did the parents receive it? Then it's going to ask about the amount of college grant, scholarship, and AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS, and then any foreign earned income exclusion. And that's pretty much it. So a lot of the families I've worked with, some of the people don't even know what these questions mean. Rule of thumb, if they don't know what it is, it probably doesn't apply to them. But of course, some can apply to some students and families. So just have them read that and indicate if that applies to them or not. And then if they are required to report investments, they would see these questions. Remember, there are new asset exceptions here for even if students and families get asked this, right? If you have parents, for example, who make less than $60,000 a year, if anyone in the household received means-tested federal benefit programs in the last 2 years, or if the student has a negative SAI, they won't even see these questions be asked of them. Only one of those 3 things needs to be true for families not to see the asset questions. If not one of those 3 things is true, they will see these asset questions like we are used to in the past. You will see annual child support received asked here in this asset portion. The reason being is that the child support paid question has been deleted. And because child support received is not something that is transferred over from the direct data exchange, they have to include this here in the asset section. So that may apply to some families. That question there is on the top portion of your screen. And then we have the asset questions that Megan went over earlier in the student section. So I won't go through all the notes in detail again. Megan did a very nice job kind of going through each one of those for students. And it is the exact same here for families. We talked about the 529 college savings plans changed. We do know that Anything involving retirement and life insurance are not considered investments. The home in which the student and family live in are not considered investments, right? Typical things that we are used to, right, would be stocks, bonds, minority accounts, other properties that they own, maybe rental properties, etc. So we have current total of cash, savings, and checking accounts, right? Again, that's an as of today question. If they're required to report investments, we know that all businesses and all farms have to be reported. The previous small business and small farm exception we're used to in the past is no longer applicable. It has been thrown out. If they're required to report investments, they must report all businesses and all farms. And then the bottom portion is those any other investments, including any other real estate that they may own. And then here's the other parent information, right? Just seeing here that, again, if there's two parents putting their information on the form, the exact same thing would happen then for parent two, right? So here's the other parent. That one parent who's logged in, if they have all the information or if they filed married filing jointly, for example, can do this themselves. If not, of course, we know for our, unmarried but living together parents, perhaps someone can then required to log in with their FSA ID and complete the section as well. But again, the exact same questions as we just saw for parent one, just showing you how parent two would then be prompted to input their information as well. And then we're done. We're at the parent review section here, right? Have them go through this review section, double check that all the questions are not only answered, but are correct. There have been some issues like we've talked about with the site, like the country question randomly getting deleted without anything being done. That issue's been resolved, but there have been some cases and instances where we've seen some bugs and things getting changed around when they look at the review page. So I know a lot of our students and families will kind of just skim through this and hit continue at the end. Try and have them kind of go through this a little bit if you're working with them directly. Make sure everything looks correct before they hit continue. And then parents will go ahead and sign. Very similar to how it looks for the student. They're going to click that little box, sort of the left-hand portion of your screen, and then they'll sign and submit at the bottom right-hand corner. And then after that, the FAFSA is totally completed, right? It says, congratulations, the FAFSA form is complete. Both sections have been completed. Student and parents will receive a confirmation email here, right? And then it kind of gives them some information about processing and what's going to happen in terms of school communication, how they're going to package aid, etc. So I want to highlight our FAFSA communication toolkit as well. Megan, you taking over here? Okay, go for it.
Thanks, Tommy. So as we wrap up here, we are gonna go through. So, we have the FAFSA communication toolkit. So this is a new resource from us at ISAC. This is something that you can download. It's several PDFs that you can download to share with your students, but also if you're hosting a workshop. In this case, on the screenshot that you see. We're going to be we'll be hosting a free workshop to help you complete a FAFSA or an alternative app, and you as the counselor, whoever, would download the form and then fill in the date, time, and location kind of thing, and you can hang that up, send it out in your newsletter, whatever you need, for where it goes. But there are several different versions. There are email templates, there are emails to volunteers, as well as like if you do like an all call kind of thing, or a mass email, you can do, there are scripts for that as well, in English and in Spanish, as well as for the emails for those families that you send them to. If you send a mass email, there are versions of English and Spanish in the toolkit, as well as some social media posts if you want to make a post about your upcoming workshop to your students or to your families. You can do that as well. So I know we've gotten some questions in the Q&A about gap access. So I'm going to talk about that now. So this is the screen you'll still see once gap access is populated for you. So I think we talked a little bit about this, but I think at the beginning was that there have been some processing delays from the department. And so we have not yet, ISAC, have not yet received ICER data or FAFSA data for students who have completed a FAFSA. And so what's happening is that because we don't have that information yet, we cannot match that with your class rosters that we get from the State Board of Education. And so this information on gap access, so some of you may have gone into gap access to see your completion, and the class of 24 hasn't shown up. And that's because we don't have the FAFSA data for them yet. And so while the department has said late January, and we're in late January, it's maybe going to be a little bit longer than late January. because they're still working some kinks out. So patience is not my virtue, but this is where we do ask for patience, especially with your students kind of thing, is as if their things are still in review or it hasn't linked up yet on gap access when it goes through, is just try and be patient. But for right now, gap access is not loaded for your class roster for you to see who's completed a FAFSA or an alternative application. And so, but once it does, it will be there, okay? But we're just waiting on that FAFSA data from the department. So if you're not aware, we do have the First Generation Scholars Network. So this is a network for first generation students. So I'm a first gen, so is Tommy. And majority of the team that we're on are also first generation students. So we have a new network here at ISAC that your students can join to hear about about getting support as they transition into school. And so it's super, like, I know I had a lot of questions or I didn't know what to ask when I was enrolling in my undergraduate degree, as well as even when I got to grad school. But know that your students can get additional support, and they can have check-in meetings with our ISAC core members or another person who is a first gen. And so that is a network that we have, which leads us to our first gen symposium. So we opened registration today. The QR code that you see on your screen is if you are a first generation student, and if you're as a professional, if you would like to be showcased or displayed in the exhibit that we're going to have, please feel free to scan that QR code, as well as you can go to isac.org/pd/firstgen symposium, and you can find the link there as well. To submit a photo and tell us where you went to school as a first generation college student. So know that the First Gen Symposium is going to be on Monday, March 11th. We're very excited to be in person. It's our first annual one at North Central College in Naperville. So they have graciously decided to host for us. And so they have a great first generation program that they house. And one of those things is where we're going to do it. And so registration did open today. We sent out an e-message this morning that actually went out. But again, you can email us when I show us our email to inquire about those things. We're happy to direct you where you need to go. But in this case, if you'd like to be displayed for the exhibit, just a photo or where you went, tell us where you went to school, we'll highlight that you're a first gen. So the fun part now. So what's going to happen is if you need CE credits or professional development hours, or even if you don't need either of them, we encourage everyone to submit an evaluation for today. But if you do need CE credits or PD hours, you need to submit the evaluation that Tommy just dropped in the chat, which is located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on a laptop, you need to complete that by 11:59 p.m. on Monday the 29th. So we'll give you through the weekend kind of thing, and through Monday night. But please, especially if you're requesting PD hours, you have to submit your Illinois Educator Identification Number, so your EIN. We cannot give you a PD hour unless we have that. So please make sure you put that in the evaluation. Again, Tommy put the link in the chat. It's located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If for some reason you can't get through, you can certainly email us, and we're happy to provide that to you as well. So we thank you so much for letting to listen to Tommy and I ramble during this last hour and a half. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the professional development team at isac.outreachtraining@illinois.gov. We are happy to assist you, especially if you've come across any situation with families right now and you don't have someone to turn to, or say if you use the ISAC core and you can't, for some reason you haven't been able to get a hold of them or something, or they're out sick, whatever it may be, please feel free to email us, and we are happy to help assist you as much as we can to help get where you need to go. So you of course can sign up for our e-messaging. This is our version of a listserv. This is how when we announce different things. So if you already signed up, great. But if you're not so far, this is when we announced the First Gen Symposium, FAFSA Symposium, PACE Symposium, and all of our webinars that we do too. So we'll stick around a little bit to answer any more questions that you have. Please put them in the Q&A. That's located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen under the 3 dots now if you're on